When you don't have quite the right supplies, sometimes you gotta think outside the box. But today, I'm thinking inside the box. In fact, that box. Hello, it's Carrie at Inkhill Revival, and we're doing an alternative inspiration card today. What are you grateful for? Well, this one's easy for me. Being cozy. Snuggled up in front of a fire with a blanket and hot chocolate. Ugh, so nice. Only problem is, I don't have a single supply that looks anything like a fire. But let me show you how I still pull it off with the help of lots and lots of texture. I hope it inspires you to stretch your supplies and make them fit whatever you're grateful for. I was serious about there being a lot of texture on this card. I'm going to show you 5 different ways to texturize to build a realistic scene. Now this scene is based on my living room, and I kind of got crazy accurate here. So my first texture I'm using to create my slate fireplace. Now I'm using debossing, which is the opposite of embossing. Debossing is where you're making an impression in the paper, or rather a depression. Now you can get the same effect when you use an embossing folder, but choosing the reverse side where there is a depression. But I'm using my track of my paper trimmer here to every 1/4 inch create a line of slate. Now it might feel a little tedious, but just be glad you're not actually laying these stone tiles like my husband. I will take paper as my medium of choice any day over tile. I'm using a Hero Arts rectangle nesting die to run through the die cut machine and cut out my fireplace opening. Of course, you can use scissors for something like this, but why would you cut when you can die cut? The second texture is dry embossing. Now I'm using a Sizzix Star Bright Texture Fades embossing folder, and this is one of my absolute favorite embossing folders. It works very well for indoor scenes. I often use it as wallpaper. Coming back in and using my bone folder to deboss a few more vertical lines just to show the differentiation between the different slate tiles. Now I waited to do this to be sure I knew where the fireplace opening was and leave a nice clean spot for my sentiment. On to the third texture, tone-on-tone stamping. I'm going to use this quite a bit for several elements on this card. Right now I'm making the wood floors using a My Favorite Things wood plank background and stamping it with craft ink from Simon Says Stamp onto craft cardstock. I'm placing the paper over the stamp and rubbing for just a little bit. Starting to get a little more creative here. I'm using this log from Lawn Fawns Into the Woods and stamping it on brown cardstock with W+9 coconut husk ink. These are going to be my fireplace logs. Again, I don't have the right supplies, but this will work great. Easiest fussy cutting ever. I want very rough edges and I want all 3 pieces to look different, so I get to just cut haphazard and however it turns out is great. Literally adding black soot to these logs right now with some black soot distress ink. I'm going to be using a coordinating die from one of my all-time favorite stamp sets. This is My Favorite Things Make Yourself at Home. Before stamping my tone-on-tone texture, I'm coming in and adding some shadow with a very light shade of purple. Now, purple is the true complementary color to yellow, unlike my mistake last week. And using a complementary color will desaturate the other color. Now I'm coming in with a very light shade of gray just to blend that purple in. I want to mold my clear stamp to be have the same curves as that blanket. So a trick is to put the image that you want to stamp onto, flip it backwards, and place it under your clear block. And at that point, you can then follow the lines with your stamp, create the same curves. I'm using W+9's knit patterns right here and stamping with My Favorite Things pineapple ink. Now I love this trick of just using the coordinating die rather than the stamped image because it gives you the flexibility to completely change the look and in this case, add our own tone-on-tone texture. Prepping the hearth here, I am cutting it at a diagonal to give the, what is the name for that? It's perspective, right? To give the perspective of distance. But don't tell my kids that I forgot that. They both just did perspective drawings in art. More black soot around the edges because again, we're talking a fireplace here. Can't pass up this black soot pun. Almost done with the tone-on-tone stamping. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Fog ink and a Stampin' Up! Texture stamp. It's just the perfect look for this concrete hearth. On to texture number 4. This is my favorite one of the whole card. It's coloring on vellum with Copics. But first I needed to get my fire shape down. I tried to freehand a fire and I don't even know, it looked like a blob. So I had to consult Goodnight Moon at bedtime tonight and see what on earth is the shape that makes a fire look like a fire. Gotta get those curves right. Now to start off, I've flipped my vellum over so that the pencil marks are on the back side, and I am filling in the entire flame with my lightest color of Copics, just putting a base layer down. Now the thing I found with vellum is your Copic markers sit very wet on top of the paper for a little bit of time before they dry. And take that to your advantage, use it to your advantage. Put down your next colors fairly quickly while everything is still nice and wet, and you're able to get a very nice blend. Now I found that if you added color after the Copics had completely dried, it almost created more of like a blobby look. It lifted the ink a little bit, smudged it around, and you didn't get as smooth of a blend. So I'm just adding my deeper and deeper colors closer to the bottom of the flame, using a flicking motion. Again, because those Copics sit so wet on the surface, I'm able to come back in with that lightest shade and drag some of the dark shade up the flame. Now I almost skipped this part of the card because it is just utter ridiculousness. It's such a tiny little thing I'm making, but we need a hot cocoa mug. It is just, I am so grateful for hot chocolate when I'm by a fire in a blanket. So I put down a little bit of light gray Copic marker and am cutting out my own mug since I don't have one. I thought I was being really clever using 2 different sizes of hole punches to cut out my mug handle, but it got out of hand. I think scissors would have been easier. So much for trying to take a shortcut. The 5th and final texture is using glossy accents. This creates the perfect sheen for a ceramic mug, and you know what? It was the easiest part of the whole mug, which surprised me. It's got a good applicator tip. I've stamped some of the furniture from that My Favorite Things set again that I love, and I'm using some Copic markers just to quickly color this table. Now I'm doing a little outside the box coloring here. I'm using some pumice stone distress ink and ink blending it onto the couch, working from the center out, so the darkest spot is in the center. It just was the perfect color of my couch at home, and I did not have that color in Copic markers. Now the top one ended up a little blotchy for my liking, but always stamp myself some extras, and I like how the second one turned out. I basically tried to prevent as much ink from going on the front part of the cushion to give some shading to the back and lightness on the front where the fire would be shining. If you started using your inks to color, how many more colors would you have? And that's always an option if you plan to fussy cut your final image. Pulled out my Misty and my Misty Creative Corners ruler to get my sentiment just perfect on the fireplace. After applying my anti-static powder tool to the paper, I'm using Versamark ink to stamp the sentiment because I'm planning to heat emboss this. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Ultrafine Gold Embossing Powder, which looks just gorgeous on black. Now this is one of those details that's just plain overboard, but that's what's fun. I'm using some Versamark ink to rub onto the bottom of this table so it can have gold heat emboss tips in true mid-century style. Always love getting to the part where card assembly begins. To create, again, the perspective, the back pieces that are in a distance will be taped down flush to the card background with a tape runner, and the smaller pieces with some liquid glue. Now that I'm onto the foreground, which is the fireplace and the fire, I'm going to be attaching it with foam tape so it appears closer. Oh, but vellum, you're always a problem to adhere. I'm going to solve this by using some tape runner to adhere the logs to the front and the back of the vellum so that I have a good spot to hide the foam tape behind. The fire wanted to fold over into the background, so I just am using my bone folder here to curl it towards the front of the card. And that does it. 5 textures in one fireplace scene card with no fire supplies. As always, thank you for hanging out here today. Hope that you're inspired to go and create your own card about something you're grateful for. If you enjoy what you see here, please subscribe, hit the button below. You'll be the first to know each time there's a new video out every Monday morning.